I'll keep my identity private for this because, honestly, it's humiliating. It's also probably a bad idea to have my name linked to something this disturbing. Back in 2017, I found a Craigslist ad from a guy named Jackson. He was offering free lodging for a girl who would act as a housekeeper, basically an au pair role, but without the kids. At 21, I'd lost my drive. My relationship with my parents and sister was non-existent, and I only had a few friends I actually trusted. I dropped out of college during my freshman year, which was why my parents were so frustrated with me, and I was stuck in a dead-end job at a vape shop. I call that my attitude era. When I saw Jackson's ad, it hooked me. There were about 10 photos of the house, a modest, slightly old-fashioned middle-class place. But the pictures weren't the main draw. It was the fact that he offered free rent for a nanny-style role with no background check required. I didn't even ask my family for advice before responding. Like I said, we weren't on speaking terms. I texted the number and Jackson replied within minutes. He answered all my questions perfectly, which made me even more interested. Early on, he asked for my gender. When I confirmed I was female, his messages became noticeably longer. I didn't think much of it. People usually prefer female housekeepers. Plus, I just wanted out of my parents' house. He explained he was gone most of the day for work but wanted to come home to a clean house and an occasional cooked meal. I was totally fine with that. Free housing in exchange for some cooking. It beat the wage cage at the vape shop any day. He even said he'd pay for all the groceries. It felt too good to be true. He invited me over that afternoon to see the place. A few hours later, I was driving my beat-up Civic to a perfectly normal-looking neighborhood. The block was quiet, and the neighbors had flowers and decorations out. It felt safe. I rang the bell, and a man opened the door. He was much older and larger than I imagined, maybe 60, 6 feet tall, with a gray beard and a bit of a belly. He greeted me with a big smile and even a hug, which actually made me feel more at ease. He gave me a tour of the 2-story house. The first floor was standard, but upstairs he only showed me the guest room I'd be using and the shared bathroom. 2 other doors stayed shut. He said I could use the office across the hall, but his room and another room down the hall were off limits. I was surprised there was only 1 bathroom for the whole floor. He also showed me the basement, claiming it was just for laundry and working out. I told him I wanted the job, and he hired me on the spot. 2 days later, I moved in. I told my parents I'd found an apartment and left it at that. The first night, I noticed the cameras. They weren't hidden, just small black devices mounted in the corners of the kitchen and living room. I told myself it made sense. He was letting a stranger live in his home and wanted security. Still, I wished he'd mentioned them. That was the first red flag moment. That night, the house felt much louder than during the tour. I heard the floors creaking constantly. At one point, around 1:30 a.m., I swear I heard a door shut downstairs. I convinced myself it was just an old house and that I was overthinking things because of the silence. The next morning, he was already gone. He'd left a list of chores: laundry, vacuuming, and cleaning the kitchen. It felt good to be productive and away from my parents shouting. I spent the day cleaning and then setting up my room with my laptop and personal items to make it feel like home. The first week was actually fine. We talked for a bit when he got home, basic stuff about where I grew up and my future plans. I cooked dinner a few times and he seemed happy. I started to think I had overreacted. But the honeymoon phase ended abruptly. One night I made a chicken and vegetable pasta dish. I'm no chef, just a young goth girl doing my best. When he got home, he looked drained and cranky. He took one bite and his expression soured. He called the food bland and snapped at me, saying if I was living there for free, I should at least learn to cook something edible. He pushed the plate away and ordered me to clean up his kitchen. His personality shift was terrifying. I cleaned up in silence, hoping he was just having a bad day. The next morning, I apologized to keep the peace. He laughed it off like nothing had happened. Then he made it weird. He suggested I could make it up to him by cleaning the house in my underwear that day. He smiled like it was a joke. I froze and told him I wasn't comfortable with that. He just laughed again, told me to relax, and went to bed. I was shaken. I finally texted a close friend and told her everything. She told me I was insane for staying and needed to leave immediately, but I didn't want to go back to my parents and feel like a failure. I felt like I still had control here. The following Monday, I was driving to get groceries with money he'd left. A car behind me started honking and followed me until I pulled over. A girl about my age got out and ran to my window. She asked if I was living at that house. When I said yes, she told me to stay away from him. She said Jackson wasn't even his real name. She was the girl who lived there before me. She discovered he had cameras watching her every move and that he knew things he couldn't possibly know. Worst of all, she once woke up to find him leaving her bedroom in the middle of the night. Then she dropped the biggest bombshell. He didn't have a job. He pretended to leave every morning but stayed hidden inside the house most of the day. Everything clicked. I felt sick. I asked her how to get out safely. She told me to act normal, slowly move my things out, and leave while pretending to run an errand. She warned me not to confront him. When I got back to the house, I felt like 1,000 eyes were on me. That night, I searched my room. I found a tiny black lens hidden behind a box on the top shelf of the closet, pointing right at my bed through a small drilled hole. I put the box back and didn't sleep a wink. I'm glad I stayed awake. At some ungodly hour, my bedroom door creaked open. I flipped over and saw Jackson standing there. He saw I was awake, muttered an apology for waking me, and closed the door. I knew I had to run. Over the next 3 days, I moved small bags to my car. Finally, while he was at work, or wherever he was hiding, I left for good. He texted me later asking where I was. I told him I'd moved back home and thanked him. He kept begging me to come back and talk in person. I never replied. A week later, I got an alert that someone tried to log into my old accounts from his town. I changed every password I have. I don't know what he wanted, but I know if I'd stayed, something terrible would have happened. Nothing in life is ever truly free. I hired her sometime near the start of last autumn. I work long hours and live alone in a 2-story house I bought a few years back. It's a bit small, but still way more space than I actually need, and I realized I was failing miserably at keeping it clean. Maybe I just thought I needed someone else around to keep the place in order. No matter how much I promised myself I'd get to the chores, I never did. One night after a long shift, I was scrolling through Craigslist and saw a post for house cleaning. It was simple: independent cleaner, cash only, flexible schedule. I figured, why not? Maybe this was the solution. I emailed her and she replied the next morning. She mentioned she usually handled apartments but was open to doing a house. We picked a day for her to come by while I was at work. She asked the usual questions: size of the house, if I had pets. I told her no pets, small house, and that I lived completely alone. Looking back, I really wish I hadn't been so casual about that last part. She arrived the following Thursday. I met her briefly before heading out. I'm naturally a bit cautious, so I hid my valuables in a locked closet before she arrived. She looked to be about 38 and was very quiet, barely making eye contact. I assumed she was just shy. I gave her a quick tour of the rooms I wanted cleaned and told her she didn't need to worry about my office. She asked where the supplies were, and I showed her the laundry room. She then asked what time I usually got home. I told her 6:00 or 7:00 depending on traffic. At the time, it seemed like a normal question. She just didn't want to be there when the owner got back. When I returned that night, the place looked incredible. Everything was polished and smelled like lemons. I paid her the agreed amount and she left. Everything seemed perfect. For about a week, things were fine. Then, about 6 nights later, I woke up around 2:00 or 3:00 in the morning. I'm a light sleeper, so waking up wasn't weird, but hearing a soft thump from downstairs was. It sounded like something settling, so I ignored it. A couple of nights later, it happened again. This time, it sounded exactly like a cabinet door clicking shut. I didn't go check. I wasn't about to wander around a dark house at 3:00 a.m. over a sound that was probably just my imagination. I really wish I had. Over the next week, the little things started piling up. One morning, a kitchen cabinet was hanging open by a few inches. I assumed I'd just forgotten to close it. Another time, a dining chair was pulled out slightly. I figured I must have bumped it. One Saturday, the hand towel in the downstairs bathroom was damp when I hadn't used it yet. You can explain these things away if you try hard enough, and that's exactly what I did. But the nighttime sounds continued. Always soft, always just enough to be dismissed. Once I heard a single, deliberate footstep. I started sleeping with my bedroom door shut and locked instead of cracked open. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I was. One night I woke up convinced I heard movement right outside my door, like the floorboards shifting under someone's weight. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to turn, paralyzed with fear. Nothing happened, and I eventually drifted back to sleep, feeling like a coward the next morning. I actually texted the cleaner again around this time because, despite my nerves, she did a great job. She came again on a weekday while I was at work. Same routine. When I got home, the house was spotless. She asked about a regular schedule, and I told her maybe once a month. A week later, I noticed food was disappearing. I'd swear there was one more yogurt in the fridge, but it would be gone. The bread seemed lower than it should be. I even Googled signs of sleepwalking, wondering if I was the one doing it. The turning point was a night when I heard clear, slow footsteps downstairs. These weren't house-settling noises. I grabbed my phone and listened. Thump. Something lightly bumped into a wall. I stayed in bed, frozen for 30 minutes, before finally convincing myself it was nothing. Again, I felt like a fool when morning came. I checked all the doors and windows, all locked. I even checked the basement, empty. A few days later, I went into my kitchen junk drawer to find a spare key. I kept two on a small ring. One was missing. The goosebumps hit me instantly. The cleaner had been alone in my house twice for hours at a time. 4 nights later, I decided to run a test. I left for work like usual but circled back and parked a street over. I snuck back in through the back door, went upstairs and waited. Around 11:00 a.m., I heard the front door unlock. Soft footsteps entered the house. I peeked through the stair railing. It looked like the cleaner. She walked in like she owned the place, no cleaning supplies in sight. She went to the fridge, grabbed a drink, and just sat at my table in total silence for minutes. Then she started wandering the living room. She picked up a photo of me and my brother and just stared at it. When she headed for the stairs, I retreated into my room and shut the door. I heard her walk halfway up and then stop. I could see her shadow under the door. She just stood there. It felt like an eternity. Finally, I decided to confront her. I flung the door open. I wasn't expecting her to be standing mere inches away, already staring at the door. But as I got a closer look, I realized it wasn't the same woman. She had a similar build, but her face and hair were different, and her expression was bone-chilling. She had this blank, hateful, almost angry look. We stood there in a dead silence for seconds before she simply turned around and walked back down the stairs like nothing had happened. I heard the front door click shut. I was shaking so hard I could barely dial 911. The police arrived, and I explained that there were 2 different women involved. The original cleaner never responded to another message. I replaced every lock in the house that same afternoon. What the officer said to me still keeps me up at night. He asked if I'd given anyone else a key, and when I said no, he just sighed and said, "Sometimes people like that don't work alone." I never hired another cleaner again. It's wild to think that 2008 was nearly 20 years ago. For anyone too young to remember, the early 2000s were essentially the Wild West of the internet. Back then, I was in my early 20s, and honestly, I was reckless. I was the kind of person who assumed nothing bad could ever happen to me. I didn't have that internal alarm system most people have. Not until one spring evening when I realized firsthand that truly evil people exist. Facebook was just starting to blow up, but most people I knew were still on MySpace. Social media wasn't the monster it is today. We'd all heard the horror stories, but we were incredibly ignorant. I bring this up because the most chaotic place on the web back then was a site called Craigslist. We didn't have Facebook Marketplace, so if you wanted something, you went there. You could find anything from trinkets to cars, or even odd jobs for quick cash. My friends swore by it, but I never cared for it until my life hit a rough patch in the spring of 2008. I was living with my girlfriend when, with zero warning, she dumped me and kicked me out. I wasn't on the streets because I had friends who let me crash on their couches, but I was struggling. I was trying to find an apartment on a $7 an hour salary, which was nearly impossible. A friend suggested I check Craigslist for rooms for rent, but even then, I felt a weird hesitation. However, I did start looking for furniture to fill an eventual apartment since my ex kept everything. At first, it felt like a treasure chest. I was finding deals everywhere. My buddy had a big garage where he let me store my finds. One afternoon, I was looking for a small couch and found a post from a guy named Keith. He was selling a full sectional for only $45. The photo showed a nice, smaller sofa in great shape. The price was way too good to be true, but I was young and only saw a bargain. I messaged Keith, and he replied almost instantly. He seemed friendly enough, or as friendly as a stranger online can seem. He claimed he'd landed a job in another state and just needed to clear out the house, which explained the low price. We swapped numbers and agreed to meet that evening. That meeting would go on to haunt me for years. I pulled up to the house around 9:00 p.m. That probably should have been a red flag, but Keith said he had work and couldn't meet earlier. The house was pitch black and the whole street felt desolate. No street lamps, just run-down, decrepit buildings. I tried calling the number Keith gave me, but I kept getting an automated message saying the number was no longer in service. Just as I was about to peel out of there, my phone buzzed. It was a different area code. I answered and a deep, erratic voice greeted me. He called me fella and apologized, saying his main phone had broken and he was calling from his work cell. I was annoyed, but my brain was focused on the couch, not the danger. He told me to meet him around the back of the house where he'd unlock the door. I walked to the back and it was even darker. I expected a porch light, but there was nothing. I stood by the back door, unsure if I should walk in, and decided to call his work phone again. Instead of a ring in my ear, I heard a ringtone coming from the bushes right behind me. That was the first time my gut told me something was wrong. Keith suddenly emerged from the bushes, waving a flip phone. He claimed he'd been out there feeding squirrels and didn't mean to scare me. He skipped past me, almost stumbling, and headed for the door. This was the first time I got a look at him. He was in his late 50s, rail-thin, with a long white ponytail. He smelled like a dirty ashtray. He started struggling with the door, claiming it was stuck and that he was embarrassed. He told me to put my shoulder into it and push as hard as I could. I knew something was off, but I was already in the moment. I grabbed the knob, lowered my shoulder, and lunged. The door didn't stick. In fact, someone on the other side pulled it open right as I lunged. I lost my balance and crashed onto the floor inside. Immediately, Keith screamed, "Now!" Two other guys jumped out from the shadows and pinned me down. I tried to fight, but one of them was massive. Keith started kicking me in the face. It was pitch black, which made the terror 10 times worse. As I felt myself getting weak, Keith told the other guy to grab the tape. I heard the sound of a roll being ripped. What happened next was a miracle. During the struggle, I had accidentally pocket-dialed the friend I was staying with. I could hear him yelling "hello" through my phone. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm in the back of the house. Come help me." It was a total bluff. I was alone, but the big guy hesitated and looked at Keith. That split second was all I needed. I tore myself free, sprinted out the door, and didn't look back. I dove into my car and locked the doors. As I sped away, I caught a glimpse of the big guy in my headlights. He was bald with a patchy beard and eyes that looked completely lifeless. He was actually trying to pull my door open as I drove off. I drove for hours, terrified they were following me. When I finally called the cops, it was too late. The Craigslist post was gone and the phone was an untraceable burner. Looking back, I realized they didn't want my money. You don't lure someone in with a $45 sectional just to rob them. They wanted something much worse. I still go down rabbit holes thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't made that miracle phone call. I made a lot of stupid choices that night, and I'm just lucky I'm still here to talk about them. These stories serve as a chilling reminder that the digital world and the real world often collide in ways we can't predict. Whether it's a free housing deal that hides a voyeur, a service worker who invites strangers into your home, or a bargain that turns into an ambush, evil often hides behind a screen. If you're ever looking at a deal that seems too good to be true, or a situation that feels slightly off, trust your instincts. Nothing is ever truly free, and no bargain is worth your life. Stay safe out there and be careful who you let into your world.